I'm Katrina Craigwell.
And I'm Annelise Campbell. And this week on Am I on Mute, we're talking about social styles and stress behaviors. I think one of the things that we both are very aware of, and I'm sure everyone else is in a remote environment or a hybrid environment, is that some of the benefits from social cues and being in person and the nuances of just interpersonal relationships at work and communication are a little bit more difficult when it's on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever the case may be, which is why we really wanted to dive into this episode so that we can better understand, one, what our social styles are, how do we show up during stressful moments, but also how can we do better? How can we use this information to our benefit so we can show up as better listeners, better leaders, better team members, better managers, and I guess really simply better humans? And so we have a really special guest this week. Katrina, I'll let you do the honors of introducing her.
Oh my gosh, we're so lucky. We have our coach, Kate Payne. I have been working with her for about a decade at this point. Annelise, you've been working with her for a number of years as well. My experience with her, we've done a lot, 360 review. We have used this framework that Annelise mentioned called social styles. And there are a number of different frameworks to think about behavior and personality and how each person excels and what they might need to excel. And this particular one I found super, super helpful, very, very practical in the way that Kate applies it. And as Annelise said, a lot of the interpersonal interactions are harder and more complex now that we have kind of moved into a remote and or hybrid way of working. And so part, I think, of this conversation is about really recommitting to doing the work to understand yourself and then understand others around you. And then think about how the behaviors of best kind of supporting your colleagues and your team might change or evolve when you're lending that support in a hybrid way. And so we're so excited to have Kate on. Kate Payne has been advising senior leaders in business for over 20 years. Her approach emphasizes getting results through honest assessments of what is and isn't working, crafting a clear vision for the future, and setting a realistic and actionable plan to get there. Through the lens of business and psychology, Kate listens deeply to clarify what her clients want, and then partners through coaching to activate their confidence and build their leadership capabilities in order to achieve their goals. Throughout her coaching career, Kate has worked with clients including NBC Universal, GE, Interpublic Group, AccuWeather, and Viacom, to name a few. Welcome, Kate.
I'm excited to be here. Obviously, you know how I feel about both of you. It's not copacetic to say I have favorite clients, but two of my favorites.
We'll take it. We love that. You are our favorite coach, so it's fine.
So I wanted to start by asking about social styles. And for some background, Kate, you and I started working together probably a decade ago at this point.
Wow.
And the process of working together was I went through 360 feedback, getting feedback from my colleagues when I was at GE. And then you and I went through that feedback, but we also spent some time kind of assessing my style. And there are a lot of different frameworks for assessing your style. We used a framework that was focused on social styles. And it's always fun to kind of do the personality, assessment of like, which color are you? Which team are you on? But one of the things that I loved about this framework was it talked about not just how do you behave when you're at your best, but also how do you behave when you're stressed and what do you need to get through that? So can you talk a little bit about the social styles framework?
Yes. I'm going to try to keep this relatively high level because there's obviously so many layers to it. So it really is about our natural habits of behaving when we're interacting with other people, which is why it's called social style. So we have these preferences that we are acting in certain ways in order to get needs met. And there are a couple of dimensions of social style. I won't go into too much detail, but one of the continuums on which we fall is whether we are ask assertive or tell assertive. Sort of obvious how that plays out. If we're tell assertive, we're more inclined to speak what we think, what we feel. We put it out there. We're comfortable doing that. Ask assertive is we're more comfortable sort of asking questions and getting curious as a way to influence. So there's no better or worse place to be on that continuum. And then another continuum is what's referred to as responsiveness, which is our comfortableness disclosing emotions and feelings versus keeping them private. And so these two continuums are sort of overlaid and we get 4 styles. And I know that can sound extremely constricting, but there are actually many more styles than just 4. But at the highest level, based on where we fall in these continuums, we profile in one of 4 styles. And there are a lot of behaviors that are associated with that. Like we can behave in very predictable ways when we know what our style is, which is a really beautiful thing. Because what it does is it allows us to choose our responses versus just react sometimes.
What are the 4 styles?
Highest level, the styles are driver, expressive, amiable, and analytical. So drivers, for example, profile as less responsive, which means they are less disclosing of emotions and feelings. That's not quite as comfortable to them. They're more comfortable focusing on tasks, the business at hand, information. But they're also ask assertive, which means they are very comfortable telling you what they want you to do, what they think in any situation. And they are outwardly goal oriented as a result. Every style is goal oriented, but we place a premium on how we get to that goal. We have different premiums. And so for a driver, for example, and there are other behaviors that are associated with drivers, like they move quickly, they speak quickly, they make decisions quickly, they place a premium on efficiency. So it's all about let's get to the results as quickly as we can. Let's check the box and let's move on and keep doing the work.
I took the assessment before we did this.
You did?
Yeah, I did. I was reading through it and I was like, oh boy.
Oh, I'm so glad you did that.
Yeah.
One thing I want to say before we continue in the styles is what I love about this particular instrument is that it is focused on outward behaviors. It's what we see and what we hear, but it's also referred to as a multi-rater instrument. So you took the self-assessment, but what's really fantastic is when you invite people with whom you work to take it on your behalf, it's like less than 10 minutes, then you can see what style they think you are. That's actually what we really care about. It's one reason I'm partial to this instrument because there are millions of them out there, as you mentioned, Katrina. But this one is like, wait, what we think about ourselves, like how we come across is not always how others perceive us. And so when we talk about leadership and really understanding like what makes us tick, why we behave the ways that we do, that's really important from a self-awareness standpoint. But the other important part of self-awareness is like, what's the impact on other people and how is that perceived? And sometimes we are not entirely clear on that. So anyway, back to the style. So we have driver style. It's about efficiency, get it done, results oriented, care a little bit less about the relationships, obviously, because they're less responsive. So the next style is expressiveness. Expressiveness is also tell assertive. So outwardly goal oriented, influences through telling. Different from drivers, though, because they profile as more responsive. So they're more comfortable sharing their feelings, disclosing their emotions. So they tend to be more relational. And so some of the other characteristics that are associated with drivers, the relational aspect, the tell assertiveness, they also want to get things done and they like to move at a faster pace than some other styles, but they are less inclined to want to just check the box and get results. They approach their work with a little bit more creativity in terms of, are we thinking about this innovative ways? Are we iterating on this? Are we improving on this? So I will say to clients, it's less about getting it done and it's more about sort of kicking the can further down the road. There are other behaviors associated with that style. So then we move over to the other quadrant, which is amiables. So amiables are highly responsive, expressive, so more relationally oriented, disclose feelings and emotions, tend to be less linear in their thinking. That's another preference that we have. However, different from drivers and from expressives, they are ask assertive. So they move at a more moderate pace and they tend to ask more questions. They tend to build alliances or they are drawn to processes. These are other ways that they influence. And the premium that they hold in highest regard for getting work done is making sure that everyone is on board with what's getting done. So they're the most team oriented of all the styles. Are we leveraging everyone's strengths here? Are we listening to everyone? Are we taking into consideration people's concerns? Because ultimately, if we want to accomplish something, if people aren't on board, we're not going to accomplish it. So they place a premium on those relationships. And then the last style at the highest level is referred to as the analytical style. That is also ask assertive. So ask questions, build a process, move at a more moderate pace, but they are not as responsive as the expressives and the amiables. They are more task and information oriented. They're a little bit more business focused. So they care a little bit less about the relationship. And in the end all be all for the analytical style is to get it right. So the analytical style doesn't care how long it's going to take, as long as we can do it the right way the first time so that we're not going to waste time going down the wrong path and then having to reset. So those are the 4 styles at the highest level. And then the other really important component of this is this idea of versatility, which we get evaluated on. And that is our ability to temporarily flex our style to work with others.
So first, at the highest level, the 4 styles sound like to get it done, to move it forward, to bring everyone along, and to get it right.
Exactly.
And that sounds like an amazing team of people. Do people change styles over time?
So we have a tendency not to change styles, but what we do change is our level of versatility. The beautiful thing about this model is that it's just behaviors. These are just natural habits. So even being introduced to the idea of social style, you build your awareness around why you make the choices that you do. And so what you can learn to do is make a different choice. So if I'm someone who typically just puts my opinion out there, I'm very comfortable saying like, well, here's what I think we should do. Versatility is there are certain moments where I should sit back, I should let somebody else speak first, or I should ask a question. That's like the simplest example. And that's versatility, which is that's not my natural style, but I'm flexing to make space for others in the room. And so you can grow your versatility. And that's really the goal of like leadership coaching is how can you become a more versatile leader and work with a wider variety of people?
Yeah, even when I was taking the self-assessment, I think I scored high in drivers as like I think my score was 10. I wrote it down. And then my second was expressive, which was 8. And as I was reading through both of them, I was like, "Oh, I see how I move between these two things in my everyday work," which I think brings me to the next question is, how should managers, teams, independent contributors, how should they think about using this information?
So, how to use your style? The first thing is just continuing to build self awareness and know, depending on what your style is, your natural preference, like where do you spend most of your time? Like you just said, I have some tendencies as a driver, some as expressive. Like I can see when I do. So, where do I spend most of my time? What are the strengths that come with that? And what are the weaknesses? Because that's really important because we will behave in ways which will get in our way. It will interrupt our relationships with other people. And then also to understand what's really helpful, I think, with clients is to understand what are our, this is an overused word, but triggers. What sends us into what's referred to as backup, which is when we're under interpersonal stress, our natural habits tend to back up to a rigid or extreme version of our style. We usually behave in ways that are not that productive. So, being aware of what causes us to feel stressed, especially when we're working with others, to be able to not let ourselves get to that place because we get our needs met prior to that. But if we do go into backup, how do we get out of backup? And I can give you some examples of that. So, that's super helpful for people, I think, because that's where we experience tension. The most tension with other people is when we're in those places. And then the other great thing, though, how to use this is this model is so simple and easy to understand that you can learn to read other people's styles very, very quickly. And then that information will help inform how you should show up with them and work with them well, how you should collaborate with them. What do they need? And that, like your ability to be able to give them something they need is that you're going to be able to build trust and form a stronger relationship much earlier. And then as a manager and leader, you need to bring out the best in everybody around you. And if you really have a versatile, diverse team, which is the goal from a style standpoint, especially, then you need to be able to make sure that everyone's getting their needs met, right? And if they're going into backup, they're under stress, what can you do to get them out? Because nothing productive happens.
Yeah, I think that was something I found so profound from the results where it shows the growth action versus the stress reaction. And all I could think to myself is like, if I knew this information about every single person on my team, I'd have a playbook when we're in those high tension stress moments at work.
Right.
I'd love if you could walk us through like, what do you think is super unique about each type of style and role?
There's so much uniqueness. Each style has a very unique need. And the way that we go about getting that need met is also very different. The uniqueness comes from an appreciation for the fact that no style is better or worse than another style. We just approach things differently. And to be able to like acknowledge that uniqueness gives us the information that we need in order to control our own behaviors because we can't change somebody else. I think it's valuing the uniqueness because every style is very unique. We behave in different ways. We behave in similar ways too. We can behave in all the different styles, but we have a home base. when people they learn about this, sort of that appreciation forms empathy in us. So we are less judgmental about others, particularly on a bad day, and therefore we can build stronger relationships.
I want to go back to a phrase you used a few moments ago, which was when we get in backup mode, which is the mode that we get in when we're stressed, we don't want that to interrupt our relationships with people. And I just love that framing. We talk so much about reframing because sometimes in those stressful moments, it can feel like, well, I totally blew it with this person and like they're never going to call me back again, or I'll never be able to connect to them. But there's always an opportunity for recovery. There's always an opportunity to kind of reimagine your relationship with somebody. So I just like, I'm going to take that. Like on a bad day, I didn't blow it. I might have interrupted the relationship. I want that relationship and it's important. So I'm going to come back to it. So I just love that.
Yeah, so the other thing I would say, Katrina, is like, and with the knowledge of social style, to be able to, not to go into the details of how you can do that, but you can actually acknowledge what happened in that moment with someone if you need to ask, make a request to repair the relationship. If you need to apologize and say, like, hey, you know what, I feel like I came at you a bit more strongly than I should have. And, I was feeling like maybe you didn't understand what I was saying, but I know you did. And so I just kind of, like an express mode where we sort of attack, we make a sarcastic comment or we do something. So having that information gives you the language.
You took the words right out of my mouth because there are certain times where I think I react in a certain way when we are under that high interpersonal stress. And I'm like, why did you do that? Why was that your default reaction? So even just knowing the natural inclination to do certain things and being able to have the language to say, when I am stressed, I tend to do this, which is why I might have shown up in this way, and I apologize for that. Like I'd love to do better. I think is crucial for building that trust with your teams and making sure that, you as the leader can have that level of just accountability and say, I didn't handle this the right way and I know why and I'm willing to do the work to figure it out so that people can feel better understood in those moments where, like Katrina said, we might be like, yeah, we might have dropped the ball on this one.
Yeah. Well, what I love what you just said too, Annalise, is like the accountability. Because the risk is that you could use this as an excuse. I'm sorry, I'm inexpressive, and that's how I behave. No excuses, just an awareness and an acknowledgement, and I'll try to do better.
I just have to speak a little bit more about my experience with this over the years because I also am a driver. So, Annalise, like, very fun to hear that I'm also slightly like not surprised. um, for me, I think I'm more on the introverted side of the scale. And so that part of not being so inclined to share feelings, but being maybe more task oriented, showed up in a real way. But it was part of me needing to recharge, but I wasn't communicating that. And so a lot of my journey since that has been building that versatility to simply say to a group, I love you. Sometimes I say, I love you. I love this work. I just need to go stare at a wall for like 30 minutes because this has been so much amazing stimulation and I will be back. And literally, this happened to me. I was at an executive development program and it came up again. And I think I was on my way. I was still dropping the ball a little bit, was on my way to getting better. And we talked about it. They're like, when you leave the room and you haven't said why, we don't know if we've done something wrong. And so this small tweak of just sharing what I need in order to re-energize and keep my energy up and just communicating that became this huge unlock that helped me to build trust and understanding with the people around me. And it's something that I now do deliberately, both in my professional relationships and in my personal relationships. So, Kate, we've been talking about interpersonal interactions, and we rely so much for those on the cues that we get from each other. That changed, right, through the pandemic when people weren't sitting physically with each other, and we're all trying to get these cues now through a screen. How does giving and receiving cues, how should we think about that now in a hybrid environment?
Well, we should make it much more of a priority because, as you just said, it's a lot harder. I think that doubling down on the skill of active listening is really, really important. When I say listening, I mean listening for the words that are said, listening for the words that are not said, listening for the facial expressions, listening for the eye location. We are just bombarded with distractions right now behind a screen. I can have 14 different things going on. So people are multitasking. And I think it's really important, well, number one, for us not to be doing that. And then when we're engaging with others, to be fully attending to the people that are there. because it's so much harder to read those social cues. I think there are some obvious additional tips and tricks for working with people of different styles, particularly virtually. One of them I know you're very familiar with because we do this when we're in person is people of the analytical style in particular, they need time to process the information. So send things in advance, communicate in other ways so that when you do get on a screen together, people are prepared to be able to participate. Because I think what happens is it's easy for people to sort of shrink into the background and stay quiet. And it's really important for us as managers and leaders to be able to engage everyone. And how can you do that in a safe and comfortable way for others? One way is like send things in advance of a meeting so people can prepare for whatever they might be asked to contribute.
Yeah, that's such a simple solution, but it really does go a long way. I thrive in what I call trial by fire situations. So like if someone's like, Annalise, I need you in a meeting in 2 seconds, I'm like, cool, I'll do it. I'm free. Let's make it happen. And I'm fine with that. But then I realize in other situations, like that can be mortifying for people. And that's something I've had to adjust going through my new work environment. I have a direct report. She has a lot of social anxiety. So before we got on a meeting with like her dream client, I was like, hi, I need you to write down all the things that you're nervous about and how you think you're going to deal with it if when we get on this call with her. And she didn't love doing it in the moment, but after she was like, that was so helpful. Like we spoke about earlier, it took me a second to be able to even do that because I had to get outside of myself to be like, no, this is probably what she's going through. This is not your reality. So how can you best support her, even though that's not how your day-to-day work looks like? You talked a lot about active listening. And I think in my brain, the opposite of active listening is when we get too caught up in our self-talk. And I think self-talk is just so important for us to understand, take charge of. You and I spend a lot of time on self-talk. So can you explain like self-talk and how it can impact us in different scenarios, like versus like when we're stressed versus when we're inspired? Like how can self-talk both benefit us and be a detriment to us?
Okay. So self talk is like the running monologue in your head that's always on that we're usually not entirely aware of. Like you just mentioned, we say things that are supportive of what we're trying to do, of ourselves, of who we are as humans. And then we say things that get in our way. Sometimes they're very negative and judgmental. And we've read a lot and heard a lot about that inner critic and self doubt. I'd love to share an example of self-talk, a very recent example with a client of mine from a conversation yesterday to illuminate the power of self-talk. She is an aspiring chief marketing officer. She's very bright, this client of mine. She's extremely motivated and she hits all of her performance goals time and time again. So, in trying to help her become too good to be ignored, to be considered for this new role, we engaged in coaching and I gathered some feedback. And sort of like a highest leverage area for us to work on was the idea that while she is very goal oriented and she is a high performer and she meets her targets, sometimes it comes at the expense of collaborating with others. Sometimes it comes at the expense of like slowing down and listening and building relationships, right? This is not uncommon. She has a strong bias for action. It has served her very well up until this point. This is an area that she really needs to develop. An example of self-talk is she was in a meeting and she's describing this meeting where she feels like the conversation is not progressing quickly enough. This idea of like slowing down and listening, collaborating is seemingly simple for her. She knows what she needs to do and she's having a hard time doing it. And so she says in this meeting, like, I'm having a hard time, slowing down and actually listening. And I was asking her, like, what's your self-talk? What are you literally saying to yourself right now? She had to pause and really think about what she was saying. She said, I'm saying to myself, why are we spinning our wheels in this conversation? We need to get to the real work. Like, we already know what the strategy is. We already know, like, let's just move through this and get to the real work. Okay. And I asked her, how does that make you feel? And she said, impatient, anxious. And I'm like, okay. And so then how do you show up? Her responses are short. She's a little bit annoyed that things are taking so long. She's certainly not acknowledging what other people are saying, right? And so then how do people respond to that? This is like the self-talk spiral. They continue saying what they're trying to say. They don't feel like they're being heard. So they're continuing to push back. They're continuing to ask questions. And then this is just reinforcing her self-talk, which is, we are wasting time on this. You're saying the same things over and over again, and we need to get to the real work. So we started to sort of unpack this idea of like the way that you're speaking to yourself in this situation is not helping you slow down to listen, to collaborate and build this relationship right now. So through our work together, she was able to kind of revise the self-talk. And it was so great. At one point in a conversation, she said, Kate, this is the work, isn't it? This is the work. That conversation is the work. And I said, yes, that's exactly right. That's the work. So she revised her self talk. She came up with it on her own. It was a little bit of like a light bulb moment of like, wait, this is the work. I need to get people bought into my idea. So she's been practicing saying that to herself in these certain situations of like, no, this is the work. And she is being able to activate those skills of listening, which she has, but she's always been getting in her way in the past because her self talk has not really been supportive of what she wanted to accomplish.
I love that example.
I love that example. Also, she sounds like a driver.
Yeah.
So
She sounds
we'd
great.
be very happy to
Does
have
she
her.
want any friends?
Listening tends to be the Achilles heel for a driver sometimes. That is true.
You know what I love about that example is so often when we talk about self-talk, it's always about like I like beat myself down and it's like all about it's the negative narrative. But this example, it was social styles and self-talk all in one. There's so much more to what the talk track that's running in your head is and the impact that it can have negatively or positively. And so you're adding like some, I think, really important dimension to how we should be thinking about self-talk overall.
Yeah, I love how you just sort of combined all of those different elements of like how you show up and how you behave. And I agree with you. There's a lot of terrific research and writing out there on self-talk as it relates to the judgment and the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, and that is real. And there's some terrific work to do around that, which is very similar to what I just described. But there's some other elements. And it can be as simple as like the mindset that you have in that particular moment is not serving you and you don't even realize it because we're just on autopilot.
One thing I've been employing in my life lately is acceptance. That's my new thing. Like instead of I'm going into a difficult conversation or I'm going into a difficult meeting, I'm like, yeah, this is probably going to be difficult. Like I remember, Kate, we had one session where you talked about firing people and you were like, it's never going to feel good. So the sooner we just accept that it's never going to be a pleasant experience, the better. And when you said it, I was like, that seems almost too simple. And now I'm like, no, that is exactly what we need sometimes when our self-talk and our monologue is going off the rails.
You can also add on to it. Both things can be true. It can be really hard. I'm not going to ever feel good about it. And I can still make this person feel respected and valued and heard.
We could talk to you about this for hours, Kate. It has been such a pleasure having you on. We always like to close with one question for all of our guests. So, what is one piece of advice that has stuck with you throughout your career?
I feel like I'm in the business of advice giving. I'm going to share probably what I think is one of the most important pieces of advice that I was giving. And I know you've heard it before, so unfortunately it's not going to be very unique, but that's also the good news. And that is don't underestimate the power of networking. Don't underestimate how everything gets done through relationships and to make it a core component of how you spend your time. It doesn't have to be a large component of time, but a component of how you spend your time throughout your career, which is reach out to people, ask them what they're working on, share what you're working on, and maintain those relationships because it serves us and it serves them for our entire career. It's kind of obvious and it's not easy, but it's really, really important. So many benefits. You both know.
Amazing.
Yeah, we do.
Thank you, Kate. It's so good to chat with you.
Always fun to chat.
Thank you so much for your time.
You as well. Take good care. Bye.
Thank you.
I always feel like every time I talk to Kate, I learn so much. Obviously, I'm biased because she's my coach as well. But I always feel like I leave the conversation like, wow, I have so much tangible and practical information to be a better leader and show up better at work.
I feel like that last example she gave of that incredible leader kind of thinking about the talk track, what's happening inside your mind is going to telegraph to the outside. It's very hard for that not to be the case or inside your spirit. And so it was just such a practical example of like why we should be mindful and take notice and pause. And so to your point, that's just, it's like the entire experience we've both had with Kate. I mean, she's changed my career and my life.
Yeah, I would say the same exact thing. Like when we first met and started talking, she talked so much about, and I think that's why the importance of stress behaviors and social styles is so crucial, because there's a lot that you learn about yourself when you start to do this work that can help inform and just make things easier. Like I think before I had a lot of the information that I had as a leader, some things just felt unnecessarily difficult. And then after talking through things with Kate or getting more information or getting more insight from 360 feedback or peer reviews or whatever, I'm like, oh, this makes a lot more sense now. So to all of our listeners, I think some of the takeaways from this episode is do the work, get curious. Kate says that to me literally in every session, but get curious and try to be introspective and self-aware, and get as much information about why you show up the way that you do at work, why you react the certain way that you do at work. I know for me, I just did the social styles exercise recently. It was eye-opening, and I'm sure, Katrina, you feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that 100% do the work, and it feels hard at the beginning. At first, it feels like, oh, work, oh my God. But then it feels like a gift, and it's a tool that you can use. It switches those interpersonal moments that are scary, feel like they're ridden with conflict. At least for me, instead of, whenever I've tried to address those kind of dynamics, walking in with like fear or negativity, I've actually been able to flip to say, this person and myself as well, we both have needs.
Mm-hmm.
And how can I help make sure that we're both taken care of? Like, that's all it is. And everyone that I work with, people by and large, they just want to be happy. We all just want to be happy and work. We all want joy, So when you peel back the layers, all of this stuff actually gets a lot more human, a lot less scary. And it is the work.
For sure. We can end on that note. Keep doing the work.
Keep doing the work. All right. Well, if you are enjoying, please feel free to follow us on Apple Podcasts and or Spotify.
And if you want to get in contact with us, you can shoot us an email at amiunmute@gmail.com. We love feedback from our listeners. Thank you to everyone who sends us emails with topics, ideas, thought starters, questions. We love it. We read them. We respond to them. So thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.